Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we actually wanted to make a tennis skirt, or I actually wanted to make a tennis skirt. I already tried patterning it out. I already tried making a mock-up. Nothing worked. I am super close to the camera. Nothing worked, so I resigned. It's a fail for now. So maybe at another point in time, we're gonna do a tennis skirt actually. But today I figured instead of doing a tennis skirt, we are going to do a corset because that's so much easier. At least it is for me. Fuji also wants to have her cameo as per usual. So it's gonna be a corset this week, and I haven't figured out what type of corset or like what type of design I want to make. So I'm gonna do a sketch first, and then we're gonna actually drape the pattern onto my bust. Haven't done that in a long time, so I think it's about time to do that again. And yeah, let's go from there and let's see how that goes. Okay, so this is the sketch that I came up with. It's a really cute, easy, not really structured kind of bodice corset-like piece. I won't do any boning in this because I want to keep it simple so that a lot of you guys can recreate it if you so want. You can of course always put boning in between the pieces, so in the seams. So if you want to, you can of course always put boning in between the seams right here. I won't do that though because as I said, want to keep it simple and also comfortable. Boning can always be a bit restraining. And yeah, so I figured that I will be doing a draping this time. You can easily do this on the pattern on paper as well if you want to. I was actually contemplating whether draping is the best option for me or if I should just use my +1 centimeter base block that I made for last week's video. Both of them are obviously possible, but I will do the draping because I haven't done that in a long time. So yeah, let's go. So I put this loosely around my bust and I made sure that the fabric lays straight and it only like kind of touches the body at the bust area because that's going to be the widest point of my garment. And now I'm just going to work my way around and doing darts. So in different spots, like here in the back I'll do one, here in the side seam, under the bust where there will be a dividing seam, then right on top here, and so on and so forth, and I'll work my way around. I will do every seam, and then once I take off the bodice right there, the tryout piece, I will be using the median of both sides so that I have an even outcome in the end. Here at the waist start in the front, I will be doing a diagonal one because that's what I drew in my sketch, more like a diagonal towards the outside facing seam. That's what I'm doing here. But all of this can be still altered obviously once I take the piece down and actually make a pattern out of it. You can obviously still change the positions of your seams very easily, but this is, you know, a good start. And I personally like if the seam goes more towards the outside of your bust and not too much to the inside. And now I will try to mirror whatever I did onto the other side, but as I said, I'm gonna make everything even in the very end. Okay, so now that the base is done, more or less, I'll just close this here in the back. Okay, so now that this is completely done, I can go ahead and draw the shape onto this piece right here. Also, by the way, I can use my dress form because I made this myself. You can actually go ahead and click in the eye right now. I'll link the video where I did that for you guys. And these are my measurements, and my measurements more or less are the sizing chart that I'm using for my patterns. Therefore, this is possible for me. If you don't have a dress form that fits you perfectly, you can always go ahead and pad it to your measurements, so fill out the areas that maybe need a little bit more volume. You can go ahead and do that. I'm sure there are plenty of videos on YouTube already on how to do that. Or you can just use a paper pattern and do it on the table, however you feel most comfortable. If you just don't want to do anything of this at all, of course, I have the pattern linked down in the description and in the pinned comment, as per usual. So we are going to draw in the design that I want to have for this corset, bodice, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, then I can take it off and actually make a pattern out of it and sew it. Let's do that. Okay, now that I have everything like the darts and the lines and stuff drawn in, I want to draw in the neckline. So I want to have like an opening here in the front and then just have it button up. So it's going to have an under flap, is that what it's called? I don't remember. Like a button tape facing kind of thing that lays underneath, so you're not going to be bare here in the front. I think I want to have this kind of straight, but not completely. Maybe something like this. And then go from here. Maybe I should have done it here on this side. Something like this. And then go from here pretty much straight towards the back. We're gonna ignore the armhole right here to an extent. We can't ignore it completely, but in a corset that is cut straight, you're not gonna have like an armhole. So we're just gonna do it like this, maybe go down here to this point. And then here in the back, stay over the bust line, because that's usually, if you want to wear a bra, that's where the bra sits. We can even go higher than that. Let's go 4 centimeters on top of the bust line and just connect these two. So this is a very straight neckline. And I think I really like how this looks. I'm gonna have a button right here on the top. Then you need to have one over the apex right here, otherwise it's just gonna pop open. So this means it's a distance of 5.5. I don't know if that's not a bit too big of a difference. Maybe 4 would be better. And then we're just gonna go down to here. And then I can stop like a centimeter underneath the waistline. I think that's a good point, because I don't want to go any like lower than the waistline, because the hip curve is just gonna look a bit awkward if you wear pants. And if you have it at the waistline, you're just gonna have high-waisted pants with it, or low-rise or whatever you want, and you're gonna have a nice like stomach showing. I don't know, like it's gonna be cropped more or less. Okay, I really like that. Let's make a pattern out of it. I'm gonna do that completely on Illustrator, so I'm gonna do the usual, just gonna take this off, and then you can open the whole piece up and it's gonna be like still one piece of fabric, and then I'm gonna take a photo, put it into my program and go from there. If you want to know more about how I digitize my patterns, I also made a video about that, so you can go ahead and click on the eye right now. And I'll be back with a graded, finished, already cut out pattern. Also, I made a video on grading if you're interested. Put it right here as well. Okay, see you. We're gonna start off with the cuffs this time. Last time for my cocktail dress Ramona, I didn't really do a good job showing you how to make the loops for the buttons, so I figured it would not only be a great addition to my channel in general, but also as a design feature to the top itself. As per usual, when sewing cuffs, I fold my cuffs in half, wrong sides together, and then iron the seam allowance of one of the longer sides towards the inside to prepare for sewing later. For the button loops, I decided to make the loop part myself instead of using a pre-made elastic, as I wasn't lucky with the color of my top and couldn't find anything that matched. I ironed my button loop piece towards the inside and fold it in half again. I then top stitched the loop closely to the open side. This makes a really intricate strip of fabric that works perfectly for button loops. I then cut them down to 6 centimeters each. You're gonna need 18 of those. I found the easiest method to attach the loops to the cuffs is to mark the middle of the placement of the loops and to pin one side down first, with the ditch of the loop seam facing up, away from the cuff. The seam should face towards the notch. Instead of turning the loop already and pinning the other side like I did with my first one to show you the result, I found fixing the one side with the sewing machine in place first and then turning the loops to fix the other side in place is the easiest and neatest method. Make sure to only sew into the seam allowance though. Once the loops are in place, fold the cuffs right sides together and sew along the sides. Leave the previously ironed up seam allowance untouched, as it's easier to continue working with it like that. Turn the cuffs right sides out. If needed, cut down the seam allowance to around 5 mm. I did that for the side of the cuff that doesn't have loops attached. I like to give the cuff another good iron, and this is how it ends up looking, and it looks really nice and intricate, and once the buttons are attached it's gonna look even better. The sleeves get a piped slit, which I covered in detail in my last video already, so please go ahead and click on the link in the eye right now if you're interested in how to sew a piped slit, and skip to this timestamp that's written on screen right now. Fold right sides of the sleeves together and close the side seam. Overlock the seam and iron it towards the back of the sleeve. Gather the hem of the sleeves to fit the length of the cuff. Since I'm working with rather thick cotton Duchess fabric, I decided to actually put folds into the hem to fit the cuffs. Then put the non-iron side of the cuff together with the wrong side of your sleeve and sew the cuff in place. You then want to fold the cuff over and cover the stitches you just did with the pre-ironed side of the cuffs. Top stitch the cuffs onto the sleeves. And this is what the cuffs or the sleeves themselves are gonna look like in the end. I'm super happy with how they turned out, so let's continue with the bodice. The front of the bodice gets two different sides. The right side, once worn, so the left one on screen or on the table in front of you, gets the button loops. Those get made exactly the same way as the ones you just sewed onto the cuffs. The left side, so the right one on screen, gets a button facing. Sewing the button facing is pretty straightforward. Fold it in half, wrong sides together, and iron it. Then fold right sides together and close the top and the bottom. Cut down the seam allowance to around 5 mm to turn the button facing right sides out. Pop out the edges using a tool and iron it neatly. Now you can put it right sides together with the remaining front piece. It's easiest to orientate yourself at the hem facing notch or the waistline notch, as that marks the hem of the bodice. The facing starts there and ends right where the seam allowance of the neckline begins on top. When attaching the facing, also only stitch into the seam allowance. Now that the two fronts are done, this is how they're gonna work together, and we can continue putting the remaining bodice together. All bodice pieces work the same way. Put right sides of front and side front together to close the front dividing seam. Match up all notches while sewing. Iron the seam allowance open and clip into the seam allowance if needed to allow it to lay flat. This is especially recommended in curvy seams. I am just using my tailor's hem that I made myself in the very beginning of my channel. If you're interested in how to do that, I also put the link in the eye right now, so go ahead and click on that if you want to. Repeat this for all the other pieces as well, so for the side and back dividing seam, and then also for the center back seam. Once the bodice is sewn together, I continue to fold up the hem and iron it in place. To sew the corners in the front, fold the hem facing onto the right side of the bodice, with the button loops and the button facing laying towards the inside, and close the small portion of the center front. Once you turn the corner right sides out, you can see that it makes a really nice and neat finish on the inside. To attach the sleeves, find the front and back sleeve notches next to the side seam on the neckline. In order to determine which sleeve goes where, just look at the slit. It always opens towards the back of the sleeve. I recommend finishing the tunnel for the elastic at the shoulder seams on the sleeves first though. In my video, I attached the sleeves first onto the bodice and then sew the elastic. Now having done it already, I can say it's much easier to do it the other way around instead. Anyways, sew the sleeve onto the bodice and make sure to only stitch into the seam allowance. For the tunnel of the elastic, fold the shoulder seam 5 mm inwards twice and top stitch next to the open edge. Make sure to have a 5 mm wide tunnel in the end, as that's the width of the elastic. If your fabric is too thick, you can also just overlock the shoulder seam and fold it 1 cm in and top stitch at 5 mm. This might have been the better option for me as well, as I'm working with quite a thick fabric here as well. The tunnel reaches from front to back sleeve point. If you attach the sleeves after the tunnel is done, you just have better control over the corner you have to turn when attaching it, as you could potentially still cover any mistakes or anything like that. Use a safety pin to feed the elastic through the tunnel. It's best to measure yourself for the length of the elastic, but I have numbers written on my pattern as orientation as well. Once the elastic is in place, pin it onto the sleeves or the bodice and sew a bar tag to keep everything in place. Put the facing together just like you did the outer layer. Leave the center front open and sew all other seams together, iron the seam allowance open and clip into curved seams if needed. Put the facing right sides together with the bodice at the neckline. Make sure the sleeves lay in between. Also fold the button facing and the button loops towards the inside. You can sew the facing onto the center front and the neckline in one go. At the hem of the bodice, leave the seam allowance of the facing open to sew to the hem later. Turn the bodice right sides out and iron the seam allowance of the facing towards the facing. To get a cleaner look and to avoid the facing showing on the outside of your bodice, backstitch the seam allowance onto the side of the facing. So like top stitch the seam allowance onto the facing, if that makes sense. It's called backstitching. It's a practice that's very widely used, and you can Google it if you're unsure what I mean. To finish the hem, grab the seam allowance from the inside and pull it out. You probably have to kind of turn the bodice wrong sides out to pin this seam, and sew as far as you can by leaving an approximately 10 centimeter wide opening at the other side of the bodice to turn it right sides out again. This opening needs to be closed by hand in the very end. Iron the hem seam nicely and also iron the opening to prepare for hand sewing. It's just way easier if it just lays correctly already. And while at it, you can also turn the ditch of the seam in the very front towards the inside. It just looks nicer in the end if it's not visible on the outside. The pattern is already made to do that, so it should be rather easy, but you can just give it a little push if you want and just make it stay in that position. Now just grab needle and thread and close the opening, and then you're already done with this top. Last but not least, I didn't show this in the video, but you have to add buttons, of course. I almost forgot about it. You can use any buttons that you like, just make sure that they have the thing you sew onto your bodice on the bottom and not like holes in it. Just is nicer and better for this type of pattern with the loops. And you'll need 18 of those. I used 11mm ones. And then you're done. The button placement is also, of course, marked in the pattern. And that's it already for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it wasn't unexpected. I mean, if you follow me on my Insta, you already know about the dilemma with the tennis skirt. But I am super happy with how it turned out. I'm actually happy that I made the bodice instead of the skirt, because I personally think that I'll get more use out of the bodice because I just don't wear skirts that often. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, click the subscribe button down below. It would help me out so much. And if you want a more direct way of supporting my channel, you can go ahead and actually get the pattern. It is linked down below, of course, as usual, and also in the linked comment as per usual. And I have so many other different patterns on my Etsy store that you can go ahead and check out. All of them are obviously also here on YouTube as a tutorial, so you know, you have a visual guide as well. And yeah, follow me on my Insta if you haven't already. I am posting lots of behind the scenes content about my life, my shooting days, obviously my job, and then also I am posting lots of tips and tricks in like my reels. So if you are, you know, on the go and just need a little bit of knowledge pushed to your side, you can go ahead and check my profile out because I'm doing nothing else. And yeah, of course, you know, the pictures of my projects. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. I'm going to show you how my bodice looks like worn, of course, in the very end. One thing that I wanted to do actually, because this bodice has a small naming story, which I think it's super cute actually. So my cutter's girlfriend is called Aime, and she just loved the pattern so much in the bodice, so she asked me if I can name it after her, and I was like, of course, like why not? I'm flattered, and it made her really happy, it made me really happy. So If you like to have patterns named after yourself, pop a comment down below and tell me which pattern or which type of garment you'd like to see me make, and yeah, what's your name, how I should name it. And be creative, you know, like the one that is outstanding to me wins, more or less. And it's really nice so that I have more name inspiration, because it's really weird to Google names for patterns. So if you're interested in that, just comment down below and maybe a pattern will be named after you next time. So that's just a small little thing that I wanted to do, and maybe it makes you happy, so why not? It's not a big deal. Yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!